Hello friends, welcome back to another Letter Together Friday. In this video, we are going to begin a series that I used to call 10-minute tutorials. Now, the reason I called it that was because the whole point of this type of video was to break down a single word into individual strokes and kind of like get a quick win. You know, sometimes you don't have time to follow like a super long tutorial or start a huge project. And so I thought that it would be fun to have something where you could go if you just have a little bit of time and you want to learn something new or master a new word. And so that's why I called it 10-minute tutorials. But if I'm being honest, it was kind of hard to get all of them done in 10 minutes. Sometimes I found myself like going over 10 minutes. So if you have any suggestions for another name for this series, let me know in the comments below, and hopefully by the next time we have one of these videos, I will have a new title for it. But today we are going to lay some of the foundational work for these 10-minute tutorial or word breakdown type of videos, because we are going to be going over the basic strokes. So whether you've been lettering for a while or you literally haven't even started yet, I hope you'll join me in this video, because while I think this is a foundational part of hand lettering, I also think it's great to practice even if you've been doing it for a while. So this worksheet set is going to be in the resource library on my website. You can find it at howtohandletter.com/resource library. And I will link it in the description box below, as well as put the title next to it so that hopefully you can find it pretty easily in the resource library. But this worksheet is going to provide you with some of the foundational strokes for our hand lettered alphabet. So there are more strokes than just this. I actually have an example here, especially when you get into different styles. If you look at this lowercase p, that's the first stroke and that's the second. So there are variations when it comes to the strokes of our lowercase alphabet. But especially for beginner purposes, or for solidifying your hand lettering style, or for just practicing using a new brush pen, this I think is a great foundation to start with. And so I'm going to go through these stroke by stroke with you, and then I'm going to show you kind of how we can turn these into letters. So in hand lettering, we're not just going to take a long word and try to hand letter it all at once. We're going to break it down stroke by stroke. And then I think it can become so much less intimidating, especially because if we learn these few foundational strokes, like I said, that's kind of the basis for most of our basic lowercase brush lettered alphabet. So let's go ahead and start with the beginning. I'm going to be using a brush pen. I have a Pentel Touch here, and I have a Sharpie stained. This is kind of a medium size, so hopefully you can get by with either a small brush pen or a larger brush pen. I just recommend using the brush pen you have. I think that's the best one to start with. So let's go ahead and start right at the top. This first stroke that we have up here is our downstroke, and this is just a basic straight downstroke. And the way that we get that thicker stroke is we're going to apply more pressure to our brush pen. So a good way to remember when you want the thicker pressure is when you are bringing the pen towards yourself on the paper. So if you can see, I have a little arrow here, and this is going to show that we're starting at the top and going down. That might seem obvious, but with some of them, we're actually going to start at the bottom and go up. And so that's why I have that marked there. So again, when we pull that brush pen down towards the bottom of the paper, that's when we're going to have that thicker stroke. So I'm going to show you with a little bit larger of a brush pen. So as you can see, there's a thinner stroke and a thicker stroke, but they're both considered our thicker downstroke because the difference comes not in the type of pen we're using, but in how we're using that pen. So now I'm going to go to the next line, and this is going to be my upstroke, and that is going to be a thinner line. So really the variation between thick and thin strokes is going to differ between different brush pens. So in these strokes, my upstroke, which is the thinner one, when I'm using that larger brush pen, it actually looks really similar to my thick strokes using the smaller brush pen. And so I just wanted to point that out. If you're not getting super thin hairline upstrokes, that's okay. It may be the pen that you're using. And so the difference that we want to see is the difference in thick and thin strokes when I'm using the same pen. So I'm not trying to compare my thick and thin strokes using my big brush pen to the ones using the small brush pen, because they're just not going to be the same, and that's okay. So next we're going to move on to the underturn, and I'm just going to use the smaller brush pen for the rest of these so you can see an example here. But when we have our underturn, we're going to start out with that thicker stroke, and then as we go around the curve, we're going to ease up and it's going to get thinner. This stroke may look like a U, but it's actually going to be used in other letters like the second stroke in an A. So you'll see an A starts out like this, and then the second stroke, we are going to do kind of a variation of this. So it may look like a U, but it will be showing up more in our lowercase alphabet as we continue practicing. And then the next one, and don't get hung up on terminology, but the next one is called an overturn. But also we can just call these loops and curves if we want. Totally fine. And with this one, we're starting at the bottom and going up, which means that our first part of our stroke is going to be the thinner part. And then as we go around that curve at the top, we're going to press more firmly on our brush pen and get that thicker stroke as we come down. All right, so the next two that we are going to have some loops, and I'm going to start here in the center. So our center starting point is here. So I'm going to start with an upstroke, which means the first part of my stroke is going to be thin. And here, instead of starting here, we are going to start at the top. So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to push firmly to get my thicker downstroke and then come back around, and that's going to get thinner. Now the next one we are going to do is an oval, which is going to help form a lot of the basic shapes in our hand lettering. One thing I do when I hand letter ovals is I start at the side instead of at the top. If you'd like to start at the top, you are welcome to do that. I think for me personally, it's a little bit easier to connect from the side. And once I kind of start going up and around the curve, then it's easier for me to kind of transition those strokes from thin, then to thick, and then back to thin again. But that could totally just be a personal preference. So I would recommend just trying it out and seeing what is most comfortable for you. Now this last one is a compound curve, and this one, the goal is to do it in one stroke. Now if you need to break it up a little bit while you are practicing, that's totally fine, but I do think it's a good practice to be able to do it all in one stroke. So I would just say that's the goal as you continue practicing, but do not get hung up on it at all. If you need to lift up that pen in between, that's totally fine. So now that we've practiced each of these basic strokes, I just want to show you a really simple overview of how these strokes may turn out to be a word. So if we take this basic downstroke right here, and then we take this compound curve at the bottom, and then we take this underturn and combine them all together, we will end up with a word. So our downstroke, our compound curve, and our underturn, but we're going to squish them together and change the proportions a little bit. And there we have a word. Now as we go through this series, we're going to do this process with more words, and we can show some variations too. So if we take, instead of this downstroke, if we take this one right here and combine it with these two, that gives us high in a different version. So we go like this, and so this is how we're going to start building upon the foundations that we have learned with these basic strokes here. So again, if you have not grabbed these already, make sure to head to the free resource library and print those out. You can also use them on your iPad if you're doing digital lettering. And my recommendation is just to keep practicing these until it feels like second nature. And maybe even when you get a new brush pen, grab this page again and just kind of practice these over and over again until that new pen feels like a pen that you've been lettering with for a while. So I hope this was helpful for you. Let me know in the comments below if you have a moment, which one was the one that was most difficult for you. Also, if you have any name recommendations for this series, I would be so happy to hear them. And hopefully the next time I'm back with you doing another video like this, I will have a new name for this series. Thank you so much for joining me on this Letter Together Friday. I hope you have a great weekend, and I hope to see you back next Friday for another Letter Together video.